Hello everyone, and welcome to Health Law Talk presented by Shahardy Sherman Williams. Before we get started, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, linked in the description below. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Health Law Talk at Shahardy Sherman Williams. In the studio today, we have Conrad Meyer, myself, and Rory Bellina.
Good morning, everyone.
And today we actually have a really good, interesting topic that's very timely, and it talks about HIPAA, PHI, your privacy protections in the, I guess, the now era of vaccine mandates. Show your vaccine card to get access. So what are your rights? What are your individual rights? And what are the issues that are going forward now that we have many cities, including our own here in New Orleans, who are now requiring vaccine mandate cards for entry to public and private businesses? Rory, what do you think about that?
Sure. So just a little bit of background. We're now in mid-August on the date of recording of this episode. And like you mentioned, New Orleans and a few other big cities are now mandating proof of vaccination or a negative test to get into certain establishments, or at least starting the vaccination. And I've been getting a lot of questions. I know we've gotten questions, and we've addressed this on a previous podcast on, can you mandate your employees to do that? But I think it's important to revisit this topic now that it's spreading outside of the employment realm and now into businesses that you might want to go to, a bar, a restaurant, a gym. What are your rights? Is your vaccination card considered PHI? Is it a violation of HIPAA if your employer tells customers or faculty members or other parents that their whole staff is vaccinated? So these are the popular questions that I'm hearing and that I'm getting. I'm sure you're getting the same. So we thought this was a very timely thing to discuss. So I think how I would like to start this is let's talking about a very brief introduction of what is PHI and what's HIPAA, because those seem to be the two terms that everyone's throwing out there right now, and everyone is an expert on what it is. So
That's right.
I think we should just give a brief little summary, and those are very technical terms, and we could spend
How many times have you heard someone say, that's HIPAA? You just violate, and you're like, wait a minute, that's really not HIPAA.
That's not. And we could spend separate episodes on PHI and on HIPAA and your rights and everything, but I think let's give our listeners just a little snippet of, we'll start with PHI, and then we're going to work that into the vaccinations.
So PHI, personal health information, or protected health information, is a paramount part of HIPAA, and basically it's your identifiable information. Now, what that means is that could be any information that can be used to identify you as an individual.
Correct.
And so, interestingly, HIPAA has a lot of provisions with regards to de-identifying information, minimum necessary, things like that we can talk about if we want. And so any record, anything like that can identify an individual would be considered PHI.
And we could talk, just for examples for our listeners, that would be, think of when you go to the doctor and they ask you to step on the scale, or they take your blood pressure, or they do an x-ray of your broken arm. All of that would fall under this category of PHI.
Or anything that could be used and reorganized, right, that would easily identify the individual. So some people go on Facebook, social media, and they say, well, this patient on this day went to this doctor and this happened. Well, if someone happened to know, well, I know Sweet Sue went on that day to see that doctor, well, then suddenly have you violated HIPAA because someone was able to reconfigure the information to identify the individual.
Right. No, so it can be it can expand and be very broad.
Right.
So the definition of PHI, there are some things that are PHI and there are some things that aren't. So let's just jump in right to it. Are your vaccination records PHI?
Records or the card you get? Like when I go to Walgreens, you get a card, right?
Let's say both.
I think the vaccine card is PH. It's got your name on it.
It does, and it says the vial, the date, which vaccine you got.
Correct.
So I would think that, to answer my own question, I think that card that most of us have, those CDC little 3x4 cards, I think that would be considered PHI.
Interestingly, and I know you've seen this too, I've seen people take pictures of themselves with their cards
right.
on Facebook or on, I'm proud of my card. And you know what? Good for them. But do they realize that, hey, I'm flashing my PHI to the world?
Correct. And they might not. And that could be another episode. But right. Exactly. Right. So vaccination records and those cards, we both agree. Yes, that is PHI. So let's go to step 2.
Okay.
Brief overview. HIPAA for our listeners. Let's give a broad but brief, because like I said, we could spend a whole episode on what is HIPAA. So let's talk about what is HIPAA in a summary.
In a summary, I mean, you know, when you say that, we're talking about just because HIPAA is broken down to security, administrative privacy,
correct,
regulations. So we're talking about some of the privacy, I'm assuming.
I think we should focus on the privacy part. I think the security part we could get into a little bit
more technical.
But yeah, I think the privacy part is what most people are
okay, so basically, HIPAA provides that your privacy rights for your PHI can be disclosed through some exceptions without your authorization.
And those are common for if it's an emergency situation.
Correct.
Mental health is a big one. Court orders is another big one for law enforcement reasons. There are exceptions to get people's medical records.
And then physicians can use commonly PHI for treatment payment operations to be able to do that. So
correct. Billing.
TPO exception, I call that.
Sure.
For that. But then there's other issues where PHI, you are required to have an authorization or a court order in order to release PHI. So, and there's a whole bunch of regulations for that.
Yes.
So like, for example, you need an authorization to get a copy of your medical records.
Right.
You need that. So that's an example of when an authorization is required. So HIPAA lays out, the privacy portion of it lays out when an authorization is needed, when it's not needed, and some of the ways that PHI can be used.
And it talks about the security requirements that providers have to have in place and what happens if those are breached. So I think we've given our listeners kind of a good background on what is PHI.
The 50,000-foot view.
Yes, very high up. We could spend hours talking about.
We could do a 5-part more series on HIPAA and high tech.
And I love HIPAA and PHI. But I think let's just jump right into what are we hearing the most and what's popular right now. We're in mid to late August 2021 as of the date of recording in this episode. So let's talk about the requirement, and I know we've talked about this in a previous episode, but I just want to recap for listeners that might not have listened to it. Your employer says you must get the vaccination,
right, or
you're terminated.
They can do it.
Yes, I agree. Reasonings that they can do it, though.
Excuse me. I think we're an employment at will state.
Correct.
So we can decide hire and firing when we want to.
Right.
No need for a contract.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is that you have different employers that will come out and say we want to have all of our employees vaccinated, and it's an operations requirement, and we need it for operational procedures. So we're going to do it, and we need this done. And so they do have some justifications for it. Now, there are exemptions for religious and medical reasons, and again, that could be a whole other discussion. Right. But to recap on an episode that we've discussed before, yes, you can require your employees to be vaccinated.
That's an easy lead.
That's an easy one, and most people have already addressed that. So going into, let's talk about your vaccination records. If your employer, let's say you're in the school system and you're someone in the faculty wants to, promote to the parents, our faculty is 100% vaccinated.
I think that statement alone, I think you're kind of walking that fine line.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would say that. I think that would be a de-identified information, because then but then you could look at each faculty member and say, well, you just said John, Jill, Tom, all of them are all vaccinated.
Or if they don't say it, but okay, well, I know Conrad's got the vaccine, and I know this whole group has the vaccine.
Right, exactly.
So that teacher must not have it. So by omission, you're singling out. You're singling out information. So,
right. I mean, and we're seeing it happen all over the place. I mean, I just had it happen at the two universities. I mean, at Loyola, for example, we have they've disclosed that publicly on the website of the vaccination rate of the faculty, and I think I don't know if the other one did or not. I'm not sure, but I know that that's sort of a talking point to let everyone know, hey, we're vaccinated.
Right.
And so do I agree with that? From a HIPAA standpoint, I think it's a little bit troublesome, but I can understand the argument behind that. Well, we didn't, there's no PHI in that,
right?
But just like you said, the HIPAA provides that by omission or admission, if you're able to re-identify someone through data or information, will then have you violated.
Right. And by you saying that your whole staff or your whole group of employees are vaccinated, you could take that group and say, okay, now I have a piece of their PHI that they were all vaccinated.
But it's not just HIPAA we're talking about here, too. Louisiana itself. Louisiana has its own privacy laws regarding your medical information. So it's not. So we have HIPAA at the federal level. We have Louisiana at the state level. So that's what. So if it doesn't fall under HIPAA, it's going to fall under Louisiana state privacy laws.
So let's take it another step further. In Orleans Parish, as of last Monday, it's the requirement if you're going into a certain establishment that you have to show proof of a negative test or you've started the vaccine.
Correct.
One of the big 3 vaccines. So, and what they're asking, we'll use the restaurant as an example. They're asking the hostess when you walk in to say, can I see either your card, or we have an app in Louisiana that you can show your vaccination status, or you could show the negative test. So by doing that, is the restaurant now seeing your PHI? I would say yes, they are.
Yep.
Now you're willingly, I'll use the phrase willingly, giving it to them because you're choosing to go in the establishment. So let's take these 2 questions. Are they allowed, is the government allowed to mandate this? It's essentially forcing a disclosure of your PHI.
So let's break that down, because I think there's a lot of good points in what you just said. So the first one was, can the government mandate that? The government, the state government or the city government can. And here's the deal. They can look at it from the occupational license. So if you don't comply with the directive from the city, your occupational license could be revoked, and then guess what? You don't have the right to sell and buy goods.
Correct.
Right? Correct. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, if you're the second to your point, can restaurants ask for the card? Well, remember, as an individual, as Rory, right, or Conrad, we have the right to disclose our own PHI.
Correct.
So think about this. So we can decide who we want to see or who we want not to see.
Correct.
I mean, that's a bedrock principle of HIPAA. But when we go onto a restaurant's property, realize we're an invitee.
Correct.
We're an invitee.
We're not forced to be there.
We're not forced to be there. We're an invitee from simple, property ownership. We are an invitee on that property, and if the restaurant decides to mandate that, because the city mandates that, because if they don't do it, they're going to lose their occupational license or get fined. Right. Then suddenly, part of the invitee responsibilities is you must show this card or this negative test. Well, then yes, you have to do it.
Right. Now, does your analysis change if it is a public building or public property?
Absolutely. Well, yeah. No, it doesn't change. The same thing. You're an invitee on the public property. If the state mandates that in all public areas or public offices you must do X, then again you're an invitee on that property. If you're not doing what they ask you to do, well, then you can be escorted off the property.
Right. Okay. So let's continue with that analysis, and we'll go back to the one we had before. If your employer says my staff is 100% vaccinated, and your employer asked for proof, let's talk about that. Can your employer ask for proof of vaccination? I know we've discussed this, offline, and we've discussed can they mandate the vaccine, but can your employer require you to show them proof, or are they breaching HIPAA by asking for proof of vaccination?
They can ask for proof.
Absolutely.
I believe that.
I believe it as well.
They ask for proof. Show me the card. If you don't like it, you can leave.
Right.
Again, employment at will.
Correct.
And
that's what it goes back to.
It goes back to employment at will. Now, where it gets hairy, a little dicey, right, is if suddenly someone says, well, based on my religion, I'm unable to get the vaccine.
Right.
So a religious exemption.
Or a medical exemption based on medical advice, I'm not getting the vaccine.
Correct.
So what do you do there?
Well, that's a fine line. So I think if you fire someone because of the vaccine status due to a religious exemption, you're running the risk of a civil right of a title,
absolutely,
of a lawsuit.
Yeah.
On a Title VII or Title IX.
I believe it would be 7.
Title VII. Okay, and you really run a problem with that.
Right, absolutely. And I think it goes even farther when we'll get questions from, I've got this question last week from someone who said, well, my employer said that we were all vaccinated. I gave him my vaccination status in confidence. Now my friends know, because they know that I work there, that I'm vaccinated, and I didn't want that. So what are my rights? So if your employer does that,
right,
and the question that came up on the call, and I had to explain to them how it works, is to say, what do I do? If I think they breached my rights
what's
under
the remedy?
HIPAA, yes, what is the remedy? Is there a private cause or right of action? And we get that question. I know you get it a lot. I get it a lot.
It literally, I'd say at least once a week,
right,
someone asks, well, can I do this?
And I think it's frustrating because you naturally think, this is my information, I should have some sort of remedy, but
let me dispel the myth, right? Real simple.
Yes, please do.
HIPAA does not allow for a private right of action. End of story.
And to break that down into layman's terms,
in other words, you can't go to court and sue whoever released your PHI or whoever you're claiming released your PHI. You can't go to a state court or a federal court and individually sue that person or that employer or that entity for releasing your PHI under the guise of, you violated my HIPAA rights.
And that is a common question. People think that they should be able to do that, but that's not the way that HIPAA was set up.
It happens. People allege it in connection with other lawsuits and other allegations that their privacy was violated, and they cite HIPAA. But I always say, well, wait, that's misplaced. You should not have done that. The correct way, if you really are adamant about pursuing a claim, your remedy is to go to Office of Civil Rights.
Correct. And they have very strict procedures in place. I've worked with them on both sides. I've worked with them on behalf of entities that improperly disclose records, and I've worked with them on behalf of groups of patients who thought that their records were disclosed. They're backlogged.
But there's a whole process for that.
It's a full process, and they investigate, and they're more of an administrative agency. So typically what they do is they just would place fines on the entity that improperly disclosed it if they find that.
Well, there would be an investigation. You'd have to supply evidence and information. You'd have to show.
But as far as, Conrad, your medical records get out, are you going to get a check in the mail from this entity? No, it's not set up that way, and I think rightfully so. I think that'd be a
now let me just say this, though. I have seen in litigation where, in connection with other allegations that their privacy rights were violated, and they did. Some people do cite correctly the Louisiana privacy laws and HIPAA.
Sure.
And what normally happens when the case is resolved is usually sometimes you'll see, or a lot of times you'll see, well, the defendants or the entity that did this will offer some sort of a package of, we'll do some credit monitoring for you for so many a year. We'll do some credit monitoring, just to protect you.
Yes.
And then once that ends, it's over. But never have I seen someone say, "Oh, I've released your PHI. Here's a check." It doesn't.
No. I've like you said in the example that I had, it was credit monitoring. They had to have a hotline. So if you call and you thought that your information was compromised, you could call them. They had to make all these public notifications. But you're right. It typically stops there.
It stops.
So I think we've covered, just to recap, can your employer ask for proof of vaccination?
Yes.
Yes. Can they mandate that you get vaccinated, or they're going to reassign you to a non, forward-facing or customer-based relationship, or can they fire you? Yes.
All the above.
Can the city or the state mandate that you have proof of vaccination to enter into an establishment?
Yes. And a private establishment. Yes.
So we've addressed, and it's happening here.
But think of the link, though. I mean, think of the link. Because most private businesses would say, no, I mean, I'm a private business. I can do what I want.
Right.
But the link is the occupational license.
That's the carrot that they hold, and that's how they're, having this power. So where, I guess a good segue in before we wrap this up is, where do we see this going? What issues do you see coming out of this? I as of this morning, today is August 20th.
Right.
I heard on the morning that there is a group of businesses in Orleans Parish, and there's another group of businesses in another part of the state that are.
And look, this is not just happening here; it's going all over the country.
And they're all preparing to file some sort of lawsuit against whatever agency it may be, saying that this is essentially discriminatory, or it's a violation of their rights as a private business owner. So we don't know where this is going to go in the court system. It's all evolving daily. But where do you see this going with what the phrase that's being thrown out everywhere is these vaccination passports or these vaccination mandates? Is this going to be the new standard where if you want to go into, at least for the near future, do you see this continuing, expanding, or is it just so politically based that it really depends on the state you're in?
That's a hot question.
It is.
Me personally, I think it's going to, even though I don't want it to, I mean, that's my personal opinion, but I see that it's going to expand.
I think so too.
I think it's going to expand, and then suddenly, we're going to be required to show the passport wherever we go. It's going to box everyone, just like the ACA boxed everyone in and lost their insurance policy.
Right.
Because if they were forced to basically get a new insurance, even though they said, you can keep it.
You can keep it, but it has to meet.
But it has to meet certain standards.
Right.
So eventually, and so you couldn't grandfather in. Eventually, it's going to squeeze them all out. Right. Here, I think through the vaccine mandate in New Orleans and soon to be in a city near you,
right?
I think it's going to force unvaccinated people to get vaccinated. I think it's going to force that,
and I think the time is coming. They're putting these procedures in place because we're getting close to full FDA approval, at least from what what we're hearing, and then. Possibly they're going to do emergency use for the 6 to 11 age group. So it's just going to continue. And I don't see this going away until, we have a much higher nationwide vaccination rate. I think, like you said, it's going to continue to expound. And what do you do? I mean, as a consumer or as a person that has a personal, medical, religious exemption, what can you do?
Well, I don't know. I think if you have a religious exemption or a medical exemption, I think there needs to be some sort of regulation or leeway for people who can, accurately and validly document that.
And from what I'm hearing from different clients is that if you say I have a religious exemption or a medical exemption, they ask you to document it, but then they're still going to require testing to get in. So I think that is and it's almost I don't want to call it a punishment, but if you're claiming one of these exemptions, they're going to say, okay, well, you can come into our business, but you have to get tested within 72 hours of every time you want to come in. And eventually you're going to say,
I had enough.
I've had enough. I'll just go get the shot.
Right.
And I think that is unfortunately, I think that's the goal for some of these agencies that are putting these rules into place. And if you really do have a religious or a medical exemption, you're going to have to deal with that burden.
I think I'm interested to see, because it's also on a lot of political lines too.
Very, very.
And
when you look at the states, I mean, we're neighbored by two states that are refusing to their governors, Texas and Mississippi, and if we want to go further east to Florida, their governors are refusing to allow not even vaccination, mask mandates.
So you know where I see this going to, and I want to say this too, is that businesses who file the lawsuit may or may not be successful. However, I think when the election comes up, all of the actions taken by political leaders, whether it's the school board and a mask mandate or the mayors and this vaccine card mandate, I think it's gonna rise up again. And then you'll have sort of the population deciding, well, who do I want in office? Do I want someone who is going to enforce a vaccine mandate or show me your passport, your vaccine passport, or do I want someone who says I'm not going to require that?
And I think that the downfall of all this, no matter where you fall on this political spectrum, is that it's confusing to you and I, to the consumer. You know, and I have to think, okay, I can go out to eat in Orleans Parish, but I have to remember to bring my card or have the app ready. But
or I can just go across to Jefferson Parish. I don't have to have that.
Right, a mile over, I don't. You know, it's confusing. And then think of it for out of towners or tourists.
Man.
I'm going to stay in this hotel. Well, this hotel is making me have a mandate. Well, the one a mile away isn't having the vaccination. You know, it's confusing. And how do you set policies if you're a nationwide convention or national convention? You're planning a trip here, and you're going to get visitors from all over, you know, the place. You have to tell them, well, you need to be vaccinated if you eat in this parish, but not in this parish, or you have to wear a mask in this area of the city.
And I can see that cutting both ways. I could see companies saying we're only going to places that have vaccine mandates.
Correct.
And I can see it going the other side of companies saying, well, we're only going to places where freedom of choice is allowed.
Right. And it's very divisive, and it makes traveling hard. It opens up, you know.
I got to tell you, I mean, in today's kind of climate, I mean, another thing as divisive and politically charged as what this has turned out to be, it's just tough.
It is. It's very tough. You see airlines now, even domestic airlines, are requiring vaccinations or negative tests to start flying.
Right.
I've heard that's the latest. So this is ever evolving. I don't think we know where it's going to go. It's obviously going to be tested in the courts. But
what I would like to do, Rory, is we're going to, as of today, the 20th, let's table this. I think in a month from now, let's do a
follow-up.
A recap or follow-up on, hey, show me your vaccine passport. What's happened? And in terms of the current state of affairs, 30 days from now.
I think it's a great topic, and I think if anyone has any questions, comments, if they want us to address something specific, please get in touch with us. We have all of our contact information and
more importantly details. Too, if you have comments, leave them in the comment section. In the various podcast app. And then if there's something you do want us to talk about, leave that in the comment section too.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps us decide topical areas to discuss. So don't be afraid to either leave it in the comment section or drop us a line.
This was a great topic.
Excellent. Well, there we go. Let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Health Law Talk presented by Shahardy Sherman Williams. For more information or to contact us, please visit our website linked in the description below. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube linked in the description below. Thank you for listening.